Hello and welcome to my shop. My name is George and I'm coming to you from Chelsea, Quebec. Now, a few months ago I published a maybe 6 or 7 part series on making an LED lamp, and it used bent wood laminations, and in order to get the laminations I had to use a thin stock ripper of some sort. And so I described the ripper in that series. It's unique. I haven't seen it elsewhere on YouTube, but because the series got so few views, I thought it would be good to present the thin stock ripper again. Now I went through YouTube videos. There are maybe 3 basic methods of cutting thin stock on a table saw. A large number of variations of those basic methods, but none of them was the kind that I use. So I thought it would be a good idea to dedicate a video exclusively for this way of getting thin stock. Before going too far, let me mention that this is not my design. So this is a copy, an adaptation of a design that was shown to us by Jack Forsberg. Now, Jack presented this way of cutting thin stock in one of the meetings of the Ottawa Woodworkers Association. It's a really nice design. I'm excited to be showing it to you. Let me just go on a bit of an aside right now and mention that every year in July, Jack hosts what he calls the Great Canadian Rust Junkie Fest. And the main theme of the RJF is the restoration and use of industrial scale equipment. So if you get excited when you hear 3-phase or Wadkin, then you'll probably be interested in attending one of these Rust Junkie Fests. What you need to know about it is printed at the bottom of the screen, and you can learn more about it by going to that site. Okay, let's get going. So here's the jig that I use for cutting thin strips. If you wanted to give it a name, you could call it a half-fence thin strip ripper. So it starts off as a flat sheet of material. In this case it's MDF, 1/4 inch or 6 millimeters in thickness. Underneath, glued in place, are a couple of cleats that fit into the table saw's miter slots, along with a cleat here at the back, also glued in place underneath. So the cleat back here keeps this thing from moving forward, and of course the cleats in the miter slots keep it from going left and right. So this contraption doesn't move. What does move is the fence. So this fence is held on to this fat cleat. So the fat cleat is glued to the base, and it's held in place with a couple of 1/4 inch by 20 machine screws. And exactly where it's positioned, now with it you can move it left and right a little bit. So where it ends up depends on the spacers that you put in place. So right now I have 15 playing cards as spacers, and you can add and subtract playing cards in order to adjust the left-right position of the fence. With this arrangement, it looks like I'm going to get strips that are approximately 1/8 of an inch thick. So the way it works is the stock is run through this way, and the thin strips are cut off on the right and they fall away. Now let me show you a bit more about it. At this end we've got a riving knife of sorts. The front end is a riving knife. Its thickness is just a hair under the kerf that's left by the blade. And now I like to use 7¼ inch blades because they provide a thinner kerf and they give me a bigger yield in thin strips. With it I can cut strips about 1¾ inch in width. Alright, so as the stock moves out here, its kerf goes on either side of the riving knife. But this riving knife gets fatter and fatter as you move to the back. So its overall length is roughly 6 inches or 15 centimeters. At this end, it's 1/16 of an inch in width, maybe a hair under that. But by the time you get to this end, it's 3/8 of an inch across. And all of this growth is on the cutoff side of things. So here on the left, it's in line, it's in plane with the kerf that's being made by the saw blade. On this side, it grows. There's a gentle curve, and what that's going to do is it's going to provide a pressure from the springy action of the wood. It's going to provide a pressure to keep the stock against this side. Maybe we should do a demo or two to see this thing in action. Okay everybody, make sure your ties are tucked in. So let me describe a little bit what went on. So early on I was guiding the workpiece by keeping it against this fence without a great deal of pressure, just enough to hold it in place. And then as the workpiece got past the blade and engaged the riving knife, I allowed the guidance to transfer to the riving knife. So less and less was I keeping it against this fence, and more I was allowing the springiness of the cutoff to keep the thing going in place. When it got to about here, I moved over to a little wooden guide. And at that point I was no longer myself putting any pressure to keep the workpiece in place. I was letting it be guided completely by the riving knife, somewhere around here, let's say. And then of course you finish the cut by pushing it with this piece of wood, and the cutoff just falls off on this side. So as you've just seen, this rig works very well, and I'll provide some build instructions at the very end of this video. I won't give you any hard and fast plans because half of the dimensions depend on your table saw and the other half are completely arbitrary. If you do decide to construct a jig like this, there's three very important things to keep in mind. The first is make sure that your half fence is finished before your blade starts. Okay, so there should be a gap in between the end of the fence and the beginning of the blade. The second thing to keep in mind is that your stock has to be long. You can't cut very short pieces on this. Now, what do I mean by long? What you should do is ensure that the riving knife engages the workpiece plus the cutoff completely before the half fence lets go of it. In other words, the very shortest piece that I would run on this table saw is about 13 inches. Okay, so 13 inches gets me from the back of the riving knife to about a ½ inch or so of the fence. Anything shorter than that, like a 12-inch, would leave a little bit too much looseness. You wouldn't have a good purchase of the riving knife before the half fence is done with the piece. So that's the second thing to keep track of. The third is that you should have a good deal of experience with the table saw before using one of these. And I think it's really important to have that muscle memory of how much to push different species of wood through, how much to push it against the fence, when to push through and when to duck. So that kind of experience is what I would recommend before using a fence like this. Now, to put it in practical terms, let's just say a couple of years of experience using a table saw should be enough. Okay, well, you stuck it through to this point, so I'm guessing you'd like to hear some construction tips on making the half fence ripping jig. So start with the base, thin material, maybe a 1/4 inch plywood. As I said before, this is a 1/4 inch MDF. The width of the base should be a little bit wider than the distance between the miter slots. In my case, I gave it about 3 inches more, so 1.5 inches on one side extra, similar thing on the other side. As far as the length of the base, it should be a little bit longer than the front to back distance of your table saw. That would give us a little bit of room back here to attach the back cleat. So once you've cut that, you'll want to position the base over the runners. Okay, so I've got the runners shown here. So you would drop the blade away, either remove it or drop it below the surface of the table. For the cleats that are going to be the runners, you would want to raise them off the bottom, maybe by putting in some washers or some nickels. So what you want to do is just get them above the grade of your tabletop, put some glue on them, then bring the fence over to where you need it. So here I'm showing it about 1.5 inches away from the miter slot, and justify the base against the fence, and then just lower it onto the runners. Put a couple of buckets of water over top of that and let the glue set. Now, once that's all been done, add the cleat in the back. And now you're ready to cut the kerf. So you'll bring the blade back up, and it's very important, I'm sure you already figured this out, to use the same blade that you're going to use to cut the thin strips. So you'll bring it up just to cut the base at this point. The other bits aren't on this, and you run it forward to cut the kerf. Right? So the kerf runs from the back to somewhere around here. Then you would want to add the wedge. Now, I've talked about the wedge as being skinny in the front and fat in the back. But the bit that's epoxied into place down here is the thickness of the kerf from the front to the back. So it's like there's a flat plate that extends below the surface of this base. Once that's set, then you can add the cleat, the immovable cleat that holds onto the mobile portion of the half fence. Here I would use, if you're using MDF as the base, I would use glue and then also add some screws coming up from the bottom to hold it in place, so that if the glue fails, your half fence is not going to go flying into the blade and cause problems. Now all of this business over here will have been machined ahead of time, so the last step is going to be to polish and wax the half fence and bring it into place with the hardware. And so that's the long and the short of it. Okay, well, let me thank you for watching the video and for sticking it through all the way to this point. I hope that you found something of interest in this video. Thanks for being here this far, and look, make a little bit of time for your crazy passion, and share it if you can.